Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Today, I'm in conversation with Harish Achappa KM. Harish is a seasoned product manager and an experienced entrepreneur. Harish talks about choosing mechanical engineering as a subject of study and then getting into TCS engineering services as he started his career. While working on valves and compressors, how he needed to learn programming so that some of the modeling jobs that he had to do could be done much easier. And liking that and continuing to work on development and later getting an opportunity to work on a public infrastructure project, and how he learned the value of parametrization while programming, and the experience while working directly with the clients as well as remotely, and some of the good practices that led to a much higher effectiveness in terms of the solutions built. His experience of taking up a product manager role, primarily enabled by his ability to ask a lot of questions to clarify the requirements. He also talks about product thinking, even when one is working on an enterprise solution. And finally, his very valuable and interesting as well as simple career advice for those who are starting their careers as well as those who are well into their career and looking at some options for changing. Listen on. Hi, Harish. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Hi, Shuguru. Thank you for inviting me in. I'm happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to a very interesting conversation because I know that you've done a lot of interesting things. So let us start with your origin story.
So one thing is I got into engineering. I chose mechanical engineering because I liked machines and I wanted to also study in Bangalore for whatever reason. I used to be in Chennai. My native place is Coorg, so I used to apply for RV college, got that, and then RVC Mech. So I enjoyed quite a lot, 4 years. And then towards the end, a lot of the companies that were coming in, either the difference in the kind of work or the salary or the opportunities available, all of that were there. And that's when I got into TCS, and TCS had a engineering services also, and that's why I chose TCS, and then I got into the engineering services division. They were doing a bit of modeling, and they were trying to get into engineering design with clients. Okay, so that's how my career started, and my initial project was working on valves and compressors. So I asked for the project because it had a bit of design. Otherwise, many of the work was more on 3D modeling based on designs already done. But the clients were looking to trial out on designing and then taking the entire chain forward. What it means is, a bit of material selection based on prior information, and then looking at calculating specs in order to actually, design the valves, and then submitting for reviews, and then taking it up to modeling. So I was very interested in that piece, and luckily enough, at that point in time, there was a technical interview by the clients, and they were asking a lot of design questions and flow questions. How do fluids work through valves? How do you control for flow rates? Those kind of things. Luckily enough, I had brushed up a bit of the mechanical engineering concepts, and then I could actually do it. And they said, okay, fine, let us take him into the project. And that's how it started. And the good thing about it was through that, I actually worked in client locations in Italy and US for another 18 months to learn and do design and modeling. And through that, I got interested into programming. That's how my story started itself. Because initially, I was a mechanical engineer. I didn't want to quit mechanical engineering. And I found a way to be in mechanical design. And that, in a certain way, led to programming, which happened to be my next project itself. In a certain way, the campus interview stuff, while I got a couple of companies and I chose TCS, folks were telling why And I think it ended up well, as in I enjoyed myself, most of it, my initial project. Company sponsored to Italy and US. And at that time, fresh out of college, within 3-4 months, you're traveling and on a summer where the clients also paid for 15 days because in Italy, everything closes down in the summer. So I had a good time, I think, at the start of my career.
So the shift from being a user of software to saying that I will now develop software, was that based on any one trigger, or was there something that kind of impressed you that you looked at shifting?
It's a mix of two things. One is, while working through the projects, what I found was when you have to design valves and when you have to build in compressor blades, there are mathematical equations that are done and material selection, and then you actually model graphics 3D modeling. So you create equations and you actually apply the exclusion or those kind of principles to actually construct the model. And if a ready-made model is not available, then you have to write it. As in, you have to program it. You create custom functions for it. And because I was doing the design, I was getting closer to the customization, because the moment you do that, then it becomes ready for the production line. And that's how I got introduced to programming. Then I started having a slightly different perspective of programming, because it was fun. You think about it, and then you actually you create a parametric function through which you can test the design in several ways. And then you look at the results, and that's how, actually, while I read C before, that is when I started using C much more sharply, and then C++, because then you actually, make it simpler to make it more parameterized. Then started reading about objects, classes, and in a certain way started off as a hobby within the project itself. Because I was interested in doing it, and I saw some programmers doing it, and I was speaking to them. And instead of doing the design, then you kind of say, hey, I can also pair with you, can I also look at it and then understand what they are doing. And that's how my journey started. And as I did that, one of the things I realized is I really needed to build up skills in doing that itself. As in, while I could do a bit of programming, the actual work that needed to get a model out at that stage was non-trivial. And then I realized I had done my BE in mechanical engineering. I had a decent background in programming from the training, but then I was not satisfied. So I enrolled for distance learning. And at that point in time, I had also come back to India after 24 months. I was working in the project, but there's a difference in the kind of projects that were being done at the client side versus over here. And so I spoke to the TCS HR. They used to call RMs at that point in time, resource managers or something like that, to put me into a full development project. And I also laced it with, I don't want to travel on site, but I want a very good development project where I can learn a lot of things, because I'm doing my MS in distance learning. They were going a bit of back and forth, but then they supported me. So they put me into a project where I can just do programming. That's how I got into it. And I said I wanted a challenging project. So they said they put me into a project which I think I'm thankful for. So I got into the security settlement system PDO India's project, which is public infrastructure in India itself. So as a programmer, I was doing quite a lot of, I learned a lot of things, and I also saw how software is actually used in production, was rolled out. So I learned quite a lot during the transition. My transition to being a programmer in a nutshell was more because I wanted to understand how things that get used as software get built, and that led to transitioning to programming.
So when you started using software for your modeling and other things, were there any frustrating moments when, as a subject matter expert, you want to do something and you felt that, oh, why does this software not do this? Why can't it understand this?
To be honest, not frustrating moments, because one, I was fresh out of college, and so any concept is a new concept. So while that you have to build a function and then extrude, or you have to parameterize and put in, I was getting blocked by more of how exactly is it done over here in the software. And then you find out that there are some cookie cutter approaches in the software, but then to really get stuff out to the next stage of design or manufacturing process, then you may have to do something else. And that is when I realized that initially, for the first couple of weeks or few weeks, it was like, do something else, go and speak to someone else, and then they'll say, yes, I'll do it. And then, so how are you doing it? That became the question. And then that person introduced me to, do you know UFunk? That was a Unigraphics functions programming. And then he showed me about C, and I knew C. And So then I asked them, so how do I do it for smaller things? Because there are certain classes of smaller stuff that we need to do. Is that that's pretty simple if you know C, and then all you have to do is it's already there in your machine because it's a Unix workstation, so you should be able to put it. You need to get access, but otherwise it's fine. And that is how I put it. So it was, I will not say I got frustrated, but I was just curious. That's how I'll put it.
Because we normally talk about building systems with empathy for the users. And particularly for technical users, their expectations are also very high and they want to do things. And if the software is not been designed to be accommodative or be more discoverable, sometimes it becomes a challenge.
I guess the reason why I did not feel that way is many of my senior engineers will usually review specs that are at that point in time used to be paper printed, or you send it over an email and download an attachment, or blueprints that you actually print out in the A0 sheet for them to review, okay, using a plotter. So to that extent, their interaction was with the spec, the drawings, and then if they have doubts, then suddenly they'll come and sit next to you and say, okay, let's change this. And that is when when they say let's change it, then you have a choice of being able to, if you have a parametric function that can change, then it's much more interactive with the senior engineer who's actually going to sign off on the design, versus if it's not parametric, then you have to give me some time, I'll change it to what you want. And that is where I think the value of the iterative process is there, because you're sitting next to a senior engineer. For lack of a better word, they are your clients, because they actually interact with the clients and then have to sign off formally on the design spec. And they're getting through with you because you're closer to the modeling and the getting the drawing out, and you understand design. So when they're sitting next to you and then you have to tell, okay, let's change this, Harish, then you'll say, okay, I'll take 10-15 minutes. The conversation stops, and then it goes for the half day. And that is where the value of parameterization, I think I learned quite a lot. And that was the trigger for me to understand how do I do it without having to every time either change it manually or do something where I have the base equation, and then based on what people tell, the constraints, and then know how do you change the model and what kind of things that we can do in the programming to get that. I think that was the trigger for me to learn programming, because I felt the conversation was much more productive, and they were also excited, because the moment my engineers, when I did a few of the things towards as they started sitting down, they start changing the value and then looking at the model. Okay, this looks right. So can you just double check it and let's just, we are ready to sign if this works, kind of a thing. The point being that then you understand that when you work closely with the people who are interested in, and you have a way in which they can trial it out, then it moves faster. And in a certain way, I think I've absorbed that even today as a product manager, because I like to watch how people work and then see what comes into the software.
Yeah, that's very good. I think the perspective of being curious to understand and explore, I think definitely reduces the barriers of frustration, and also you discover a lot of new things to do things creatively.
Yeah.
I go back to one thing that you mentioned about the difference between working, say, at a client location versus here. What are some of these significant differences that contributed to, let's say, you feeling more comfortable in one environment versus the other?
I think the first point was directly working with the users of the artifact that we are producing, one. And because it's a technical product that works. Okay, as in, there are places where my next project was not in that way. But then directly working with the users and then feeding off the energy by having common questions when we begin, and then navigating or retracing through to get the artifact. You get quicker feedback because the engineer is just sitting next to you, and then I've done it. Can we just catch up if you have some time? And then catch up for 15 minutes, and this looks good, but we need to do a few more things. So that kind of a cycle, it was good. But the other aspect was some of that work was not yet done remotely at all. So and that's the reason why when they're done the interview, I realized that they're told, okay, this person can come in, because they wanted to set up a team once we go back and get this process kind of institutionalized, where the team can work throughout, at least for more complex things that are starting off. They can work with someone who has already been through the design process and also set up a team. So that was the idea. So that phase of where we have to learn a lot of things, understand not just how to produce the artifact, but the thinking as to when given a problem statement, why is that important for someone? Because initially I still remember the engineer says the service is difficult. Use the word service is difficult. In the context of a valve, it meant the fluid's quality is such that the material will degrade faster, and hence that is the service. So it's not the valve service, the service to the valve which they are looking at. So you have to understand the context, the words that people use, the meaning for it in how we do the design, the need to avoid assumptions and ask. Those were things that I learned, and that becomes easier when we are on site, with the client, with the user, and actually checking, is this what it is, kind of a thing, versus if you are working remotely. So that was one difference. The second one was, I think even now exists in a certain way, at least in the manufacturing and design industry. Simply put, in India, we do not do a bit of that kind of work fully, except in fewer locations. And they don't pay as much as IT does. That's the other aspect of the reality that's there. But I think the key thing is energy by working with users, understanding the context, and the ability to iterate faster. Those were the key parts that where I like working, either at onsite, but when I mean onsite, I think I actually mean working with the users closely.
Yeah, that's what all these agile approaches kind of recommend, that you work closely with the users, understand. I wanted to touch upon the other thing that you mentioned about creating a public infrastructure. So from creating, let's say, highly technical solutions, let's say in the design space, to something that is a public infrastructure, which means that probably the scale is going to be much larger, and probably the variations in actual usage could also be very wide. So how did that transition happen in your mind? How did you prepare yourself to work on a completely different area or a different problem space?
To be honest, I think after I moved into the software project, for the first 8 months, I was totally lost. As in, and when I mean totally lost, I actually mean it, because I was all optimistic, enthusiastic, and then I was doing my MS and from its plan, distance learning. Okay. And then they put me to a very good project. It was related to the Indian government's financial infrastructure. At that point in time, it was coming up, and it had, as in front end and back end. By that, what I mean is, it was using at that point in time C++ on Windows, on Unix, VB for UI, and then in the distributor side, it had MQ series, which was right now Kafka is being used, a messaging layer, and then it had again a mainframe, but C++ compiled in Unix and mounted on the mainframe. So it had a bunch of different stack, and I started off doing, I guess, the simplest of things on VB programming and integrating with the C++ on the Windows server. But even that, it took at least a few months for me to actually turn out where I was happy with it, or where things appeared much more logically clear to me. As in, from the time if someone says, okay, let's go and build this functionality, okay, of, say, I'm just making it up, something called a correction booking, which means that some booking is done somewhere, and then you have to correct it manually. So first you have to understand what it is, and the second thing is how you have to do it, and then how you have to organize the flow of information, what all layers it goes into, and then get the users to see it, and then only then you realize that, okay, fine, the screen is all laid out messy, and then you understand that, okay, I should have probably checked with the UI designer before making it up, and then spend a few more days kind of sort. And then when my model leader checks for the software periodically on a weekly basis, then on at least for the first couple of months, he was about to lose patience, because he said, no, you have to rewrite parts of it, go back and change it before we check in. It used to pass, the software used to pass all the tests and all those things. But then he wasn't happy with different things and didn't understand what it is. So I was struggling a bit for the first 4 to 5 months. And where it was good is because I'm using the word struggling, but what was actually happening was, you're writing software and you also have to read, and it is good that people are setting standards which cannot be broken, and so you are aiming to meet those standards. So I think I had a tough time for the first 4 to 5 months, because a lot of the project had everything under it. Like, it had, like I told, it had between VB, C++, mainframe, Unix, Seagate Crystal reports, Oracle, and DB2 on mainframe. So it's a lot of technology for even folks who had done programming for a couple of years, like unlike me. to come and ramp up. And I think I had gone through a good learning phase into it. But through that, some of the strengths were also very useful, because as I started speaking to my functional analyst, who was a retired bank manager who understood the functionality, then I asked him, why are we doing it? And he used to tell that at least there's one dev who asked questions. And I think that saved my skin several times when I was writing bad code and getting pushed back, because he used to say, no, this guy will pick up, just give him some time. Okay, he was supportive of me. And it didn't happen, because once that phase passed out, I was again working directly with the clients. And to date, I'm very happy about a functionality which was actually not passing some of the functional tests of users, because there are some cases that had not been specified. And I was in a meeting with them. I had gone through them and worked with them to actually change it in about 2 months. And they're very happy. And they said, he first started off with what we need to get out of this and not what needs to be done. And that's the way to do things. I think the first 3 months of my project where I struggled was more on the how to do things, but the learning from the prior project of what needs to be done, why is it important, that stayed. And I think it saved my day, to be honest, over there. I stayed in the project for 3 years. I went through a complete production cycle and I got out as a project lead. And in a certain way, that project made my transition into a software programmer, which I enjoyed quite a lot also. And that software, I think, is still being used, even though I'm very sure it have gone through a lot of iterations. The system's name is still there and still being used for financial settlements, etc. So I'm very happy with that. I also got a commendation letter from TCS, from the chairman at that point in time itself, for participating in a key project, which not only is a marquee for TCS, but also for India in its quest for finance and security settlement and those kind of things. So it was a pretty good project.
Yeah, very nice. You also mentioned playing the role of a product manager. So how was that transition from a developer to handling a product?
I guess that started off because I was asking a lot of questions before even writing a line of code. And several times if the functional analyst doesn't understand, then I actually ask him, so are you going to find it out? Should I start? Should I wait? But I'll start off, what are the parts? And then let's leave the parts that you're not very clear about open. And if required, let's get into a call with the users. I never used to demand specs or change. I'll just ask him, should I start? These are the parts that I think you have acknowledged that it's not going to change. So I'll start off with that. Meanwhile, can we just meet the client and then put it? Because I used to ask a lot of questions. I used to say, Harish, come along, tag me into the call. I guess part of it is to avoid having to recant and get more questions, and one question misses out. So I said, come listen in. Okay. And that was and then I just can't listen in. Sometimes you have to ask a question. So then you join into the call. That was the phase where, you actually understand why people are doing it. And you ask questions of who's going to use it. Is it in the branch office, in the head office? And then suddenly, who is going to use it? The moment you ask that question, I still remember distinctly. That is when even the functional analyst realized that one of the person who's using it is in state's head offices. Okay. And the other person who needs to review it is in the other office. And there's actually a time limit of 15-20 minutes by which they have to do it. Then I still remember the question asked, so how do people know when they need to approve? The guy, just matter of fact, just told that he does it, and then he calls him and asks him to approve. And then he goes, searches for it and approves it. I just came back with the problem, and then I was going and telling my model lead, we have the system that people are using, and then approval doesn't have the stuff. People are looking at, should we poll and then pull in and all of things. And then I was also reading about MQ series for a different thing, and then suddenly realized Microsoft also has, MQ, MSMQ used to be called, that kind of a thing. And then I was just telling, so why can't we use messaging? Can we drop a message and pick up on all those things? You're looking up and down at me. And then I was not shaken off, because at least that idea had occurred to me. And so I was just being persistent with it. So I said, okay, but there'll be a change. Here's a model lead. And then, some dev comes and tells, okay, let's do this. It's all nice, but then it costs certain things to do. You have this idea. I don't even know whether anyone is going to approve it. The function is also fine. And then the big thing was, will the users want it? And especially, will the users want it as a change? Okay, which means they have to pay for it. And because I was running with the idea, then they said, he again said, come along. And then we're discussing certain things. And apparently the users themselves are also speaking about it. Okay, that it will be nice if the software itself tells what's the activities, all those kind of thing. And they said, yeah, that will be useful addition, but we need to understand it should not be just for this function. It should be overall. That should be the whole cycle itself. And there were other places in the software that they had seen which it could be put in. I think that was the transition to actually, understanding the problem and then generating an idea and seeing out. That gave me a high. That's the actual word to use it, because people tell that, okay, that transition, because I was now actually building software that was less the model it was happy with, and then suddenly you ask about the functional question, and people are generally happy with you telling, okay, fine, I'll tell this guy the functionality, he will build it and it's of very good quality, and he can also take it to the user. I think that started the transition for me being a product manager, even though that's not the word that was there, because then you can get him into functional conversations, you can get him into what needs to be built. If you don't get him, he's going to kill you with questions, that kind of stuff. And then that's how it started off. And because of that, I also got into the next project where they put me in a client-facing role so that I can start understanding the requirements and build it. I think that started the journey from being a programmer to programmer/analyst, or generating ideas on what needs to be done after understanding the users, all those things. As time passed, I became more a product manager, but even I stopped programming, and that's a bit of a regret I have. Well, I was not completely stopping programming, but then for all practical purposes, I was not programming as much as I used to. And that is one regret I have, that as I got into this role, I stopped programming, because I feel that's very important too.
See, one immediate question I have is the relevance or the use of product thinking when you're building an enterprise solution or within an enterprise.
So if I have to recast your question, it's like the product thinking becomes like, how do I generalize a problem such that it can be the solution that I give can be used in multiple areas. I think if you put it that way, and that's an interesting element to it, because then what happens is it's actually efficiency thinking. By that, what I mean is, given something that we build, how can we apply it in different places? And that kind of a thinking is because whenever you build a tool, then when it's used in multiple places, it is actively used, and hence it'll live forever. As in, people will invest in it because it's creating value. To a certain way, I cannot think of anything else to actually build things. If it's single purpose, single use, is actually creating waste. Is how mentally I'm tuned to. When we are building something, then if it has to live slightly longer, then we need to look at how is it being used and what are the other areas in which it can be applied, because the act of building takes effort. Forget money, it takes somebody's effort. And then how do we broad base it? I think that is the crux of product thinking, because you take any tool that even we use, tool in the kitchen, even something that is more generally actively used will last for generations, or something that is being used for a fancy thing. It may have a single purpose, and then except for the single purpose, you can't use it. But then something that's used in multiple places or can be used in multiple ways, lasts, is actually, it's picked up, used, washed, cleaned. And if it's of higher value, people actually look for it. And I think that is the difference when building products. When we hear about something, so what are the other places in which it can be used? Or more importantly, because I'm spending effort, how can I make sure that it is used in more places? Because then it's more optimally used. I think I would think of that as the crux of product thinking, and it actually pays off.
Yeah, that answered my question, because one is, of course, taking something and making it generic. But more than that, I was curious about how do you build things that will last, not as a one shot or a 1 point solution. Yeah. Thanks, Harish. I didn't realize that we've been going on for almost half an hour, which is normally the duration for an episode. But I would like to ask you a question related to your career tips. If for two categories of people, one, those who are freshers or who are aspiring to get into IT, and the second is typically what we may call as a mid-career professionals who may want to consider product management as a line. So how would one prepare? For freshers, is there something that they need to do, like in your case, be technical first and then look at it, or do they get into functional details or become a domain expert? And for people who've played either individual contributor roles or managerial roles, if they were to consider roles in product, what could they do?
I think for the freshers, and this is the first thing is, I think to approach anything with curiosity and a willingness to learn. And I'm using the word drive. By that, what I mean is a drive to actually do it and learn. I think that helps a lot. And through that, to be actually enthusiastic, because there may be days where there are frustrations because you're not got, somebody has denied from something, you are an intern, and then you're doing a bunch of stuff. But I think the sense of purpose in learning, picking up skills, observing, and actually doing and consolidating what have we learned, I think helps a lot. And I can speak about it more confidently now than when I was a youngster, I feel, because several people have told me that that's one of my strengths. I'm happy to hear it, because I still remember it's not just the learning for the day or so on. I used to actually think about, so what actually did I learn? Okay. And when you look at it, only then you realize that you may have done 25 different things, and in programming, in learning through it, you can assimilate and consolidate. Okay, I learned something about how to approach a problem, and in that case, I did something. And a few of the things I have actually learned that it doesn't work. If you consolidate in that way, I used to feel happy after doing that, because then your frustrations go away because you have synthesized into something that's useful. For some reason, I used to be able to do it, and I'm glad. And I think that has kept my peace of mind. Otherwise, so if you're starting the career, I think that's extremely critical that we learn, we look at it, everything that we do with enthusiasm. And if it's something is frustrating, we look at why and address it. Take responsibility for that itself. Because the reason why I'm telling that is, as I was doing the UFON programming in my mechanical engineering design, I knew that I was struggling in programming, and there were choices. And I thought, okay, let me do a course, try and see where it goes. It ended up well. Okay, so investing in ourselves and learning at any point, I think helps. The product managers, I think the biggest thing, at least given where we are, if you want to build products, I think folks will have to ask themselves, do they enjoy generating ideas and having to throw out their coolest idea because it doesn't work? The second thing that I have to ask for is, unless you have a hard skill to back up by, as in learning how to build, a product manager will corral people to build. All of that will happen. What is your motivation? Has to be very clear. As in, are you motivated to build, versus are you motivated in generating ideas, versus are you motivated in generating ideas and actually getting people to build it, which means selling the idea? Where do your interests or happiness lie? Because fundamentally, I think that affects how we do things. If you are interested in building, then being connected to a hard skill of the act of building is critical. If not, you must find a way in which you deliver value by, either, even if you're working with users, then generating ideas, testing it out, helping the team see what you have seen, and learning from both the stakeholders and the teams, because you have to be in the manner of selling the idea and actually getting people to adopt it. You have to build those kind of things. So you have to be very clear about what is motivating to product management. And the reason why I'm actually also calling it out is, right now, everyone seems to be doing product management, but are we finding value that needs to be built? Are we trialing out with ideas? Hence, how are we navigating that path? I think it's critical for a person to feel satisfied in the role of a product manager.
Very nicely put, Harish. On that note, I think that's about all the time that we have for this episode. I do have some more questions on your entrepreneurial stint.
Yep.
We'll keep that for another conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Shubhra. Thank you. Bye.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.